But today's most promising commercial products of AI are not in these areas where the computer needs a vast reserve of general knowledge or common sense. They're the so-called expert systems. These are pieces of software which concentrate on specialized areas of knowledge, like diagnosis of specific diseases or calculating housing benefits. And with them, surprisingly, computers are now beginning to give the kind of advice that experts in these fields might give, always provided their knowledge can be put into the computer in the first place. Edward Feigenbaum.
Every expert system contains basically two types of knowledge, factual knowledge and heuristic knowledge. The factual knowledge is the commonly available, widely shared knowledge of a field. You find it in textbooks, delivered in lectures, printed in professional journals. It's easy to get. The heuristic knowledge, on the other hand, represents the private knowledge of experts, the experiential knowledge, the judgmental knowledge. The great mathematician Polya called heuristic reasoning the art of good guessing. And the job of the knowledge engineer is to mine out this essentially private knowledge of experts, knowledge that you would only get through an apprenticeship, and polish that knowledge, represent it in data structures for a machine so that a machine reasoning process can use it. That is heuristic reasoning.
Expert systems are being used increasingly in areas where human experts are not always around. In this Scunthorpe steel rolling mill, for example, hot steel billets are rolled out into rods 24 hours a day. As the rod hurtles about, it's important to prevent what's known as a cobble. If this happens in the middle of the night, the fault can be diagnosed by the operators using this ICL expert system. It uses rules of thumb which the chief works engineer has learnt over his years of experience in the plant. These were teased out of him by the computer system designer, the knowledge engineer, and put in the software. By simply feeding in information about the conditions of various pieces of equipment, the system comes up with the best guess about what's wrong. In this case, the computer has detected a scanner head fault. Some notable expert systems are being used in hospitals for diagnosis. In the middle of the night, a patient has acute abdominal pain.
Hello.
A junior hospital doctor doesn't have access to a specialist.
What kind of pain is it?
It's a sore pain, but it's not all that bad.
It doesn't come and go in waves.
No.
By making a careful clinical examination of the patient and feeding the findings into the expert system, it comes up with a probable diagnosis. Medicine is an area where there's always uncertainty. Even specialists can be wrong. It's 61% likely in this case that the patient has appendicitis, and 20% likely that he has Crohn's disease. These systems are proving of real value for newly qualified doctors.
Their accuracy coming a year after qualification is about 50% without the system. With the system of documentation in the computer, their mean average is about 75, which is very close to consultant accuracy.
The Turing Institute in Glasgow specialises in getting expert systems like that up and running. I've been joined by their director, Professor Jim Alty. Jim, what are the essential ingredients of an expert system?
Well, I think, Mac, the best way to explain that is to give you an example. We've used an expert system tool here to set up a simple expert system to really illustrate some of the points I want to make. It's a fairly simple system. It advises us on what type of safety fence we need on a road, a motorway or a small road, to prevent cars going off the road and whatever. So let's first of all simply set the system going and see what answers we get. Now you can see it's now asking me what is the speed limit at the point under consideration, and this will look like an exactly normal program at this time, and we'll answer 70 miles an hour. Now you'll find when it answers this that we can do something rather different with an expert system. It's asking us here, where should we put the fence? On the verge, central reserve, or unknown, or whatever. But we can do something different. We can actually ask, why? Why are you asking us this question? And when it does this, it comes back with a rule. And you can see the rule is saying, if the speed limit is greater than or equal to 60, and the site being considered is the central reservation, the road type is rural, etc., the traffic level is very heavy, then in fact a safety fence is needed.
Because this acts almost as an audit trail to the expert to make sure it's absolutely correct. That why is a very important part of an expert system.
This is the key principle, actually. The knowledge is stored in the program as it is written here. So that if in fact an accountant was looking at this, or a road designer, he would understand it. Whereas in a traditional program, if an accountant looked at it, he wouldn't understand the code.
So if, for example, the tax rates changed, the accountant, first of all, wouldn't know where to find the tax rate, and he wouldn't know how to change them if it was written, for example, in COBOL, but here he could actually check it out.
Exactly, and it's important, of course, because with experts, their expertise changes. You can't freeze an expert's knowledge.
This has been written in an expert system called XI. What's so special about this?
Well, it's an attempt to produce a slightly more generalised tool. So it's an empty expert system, and you can put knowledge in it, and it'll solve your problem. It'll work in certain specialised situations.
It's called a shell. Is that a technical term?
That's right. A shell empty of knowledge.
Empty of knowledge. And who puts the knowledge in? Is it the expert himself or somebody who translates it from the expert?
Well, that depends on the situation. You'll see later how we might be able to do it directly, but often there's a knowledge acquisition stage, which is quite difficult, because experts often don't understand what their expertise actually is.
Thank you, Jim. Lesley.
Well, all this isn't so far from the home micro as you might think. Jonathan Briggs is from Kingston College of Further Education, where part of his job is to explain to students and their teachers about how expert systems work. Jonathan, before we go any further, am I right in thinking that your pupils aren't really doing computer studies, are they?
No, lots of other things. Beauty therapy, motor maintenance, a wide range of subjects.
Far removed from computers, in fact.
Yes.
Right, well, this is one system you've devised as a teaching aid. It's called MITSI, that's M-I-T-S-I.
That's right,
What does that stand for?
It's a man-in-the-street interface. It isn't an expert system shell. What it is, it's an interface to a programming language called microprolog. What I've done so far, I'm going to put in some facts and rules, and here are some. There are 3 facts and 1 rule. It's about food. I've got some facts: meat contains protein, etc. And then a rule about why we eat particular things. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's actually quite difficult to understand because of the way that it's laid out. That's the language problem, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is an interface to Prolog, and Prolog is quite a strict language, just like any other computer language.
Right. So can we ask it a question?
All right, let's say, is it true that meat is eaten for growth? All right?
Even the question is carefully structured, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And it comes back and says yes.
Now, can we ask it why it said yes?
Why? And it says meat is eaten for growth because meat contains protein and protein needed for growth. It's used the rules and come up with that as an answer.
So it is actually a baby expert system?
Well, sort of,
But it's not a really easy interface, is it?
No. Well, over here on the Nimbus, I've got another system. Remember, what we're trying to do is write things that'll help students and teachers understand what expert systems are.
Now, so you've got a set of rules here, and these really are in plain English, apart from the fact that they're sort of formally laid out.
Yes.
And it seems to be something about soufflés. Why have you chosen soufflés as
All
an
right,
example?
we wanted a fault diagnosis system, and we had to choose something that people would understand.
Right.
And soufflés, when you're cooking a soufflé, that's something that often goes wrong. So that seemed to be something we could do a fault diagnosis system about.
Let's see how this works.
All right, let's ask it to go.
And plenty of definable solutions as well as to why it's gone wrong.
Cooked a soufflé, and it says
unappetizing.
that it's unappetizing. We might want to ask why. So I just press one button, and it comes up with a list of reasons why it might be
Plenty
unappetizing.
of ways, okay.
Okay, and if I select one of them, for example, if you ever cooked a soufflé, you'll know that it often doesn't rise.
Yeah, never.
That's
Never,
right.
in my experience.
Then
Let's
I can
find out
ask why, all right?
Yeah.
It'll say the temperature is too cool,
Yeah.
eggs are underbeaten, or the mixture is the wrong
So
consistency.
you get alternatives. Now, could you actually add a rule to that? I mean,
Yes, all right, let's have a go. The temperature is too cool if the oven is broken. Okay, there's a reason why it might be too cool.
Yeah.
And now if I ask why, it'll say
It's been
the oven's broken.
added to the information.
That's
now,
right.
using this system, your pupils, they get a chance to get their hands on the experience of being a knowledge engineer,
Yes.
an expert, and a user.
That's right. We're trying to teach people what expert systems are about. And to do that, we're sort of taking each of the ideas of expert systems and writing little programs about
And
them.
you think it's important that the man in the street gets used to this idea?
Well, if expert systems are going to be used in their jobs later on, or if they're going to use them when they come into contact with people like citizens' advice bureaus, they're going to need to know what an expert system is, and they're going to need to know how it works.
Right, Jonathan, thanks very much.
Well, just like making soufflés, people learn partly by being told and partly by generalising from experience. One of the areas of the expertise of the Turing Institute is writing computer programs which learn from experience and then make up their own set of rules. Jim, how's that done?
Well, we do it in a very similar way to which human beings seem to do it. Let me give you an example. I recently went to Cairo and I took a taxi into the city from the airport. Driving down the road at high speed, we came upon a traffic light at red, and of course the driver went straight through it.
As they do, yeah.
And I said, is this normal practice? He said, which traffic lights? So I got the first rule, which was, basically, you ignore traffic lights. Shortly afterwards, we arrived at a traffic light which was on red, and he stopped. So I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, there's a policeman in the centre of the road. Well, that seemed fairly reasonable. Shortly afterwards, of course, we're going down the road, we meet some further traffic lights, they're at red, there's a policeman in the centre of the road, and he went straight through. I said, what's going on? Because my previous examples had now failed. He said, he'd got his notebook out. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is the taxi driver may not really have understood what the rule was, but he knew what to do from a series of examples. And this is like experts. They may know their expertise, but they don't, in fact, understand always what that expertise is.
Can you show us a real program that actually learns from examples that's in use today?
Well, we've got a very interesting program here, a fairly simple but quite effective program called Expertise. And this is used, and you give it a series of examples, and it will induce a set of rules from those examples. And I've got an example here. The space shuttle can either be auto-landed or the pilots can land it. Now, the problem is the decision is taken at 10,000 feet. But in fact, it's only at 200 feet that you actually find out whether it's working or not. Now, pilots are fairly cautious individuals, and that's a bit late, actually, too.
Well, especially when you've got no engines and it's going to go down whatever you do.
There's no alternative.
No alternative.
So what we did, we got together a number of pilots, and we asked them to give us examples of the sort of conditions under which you'd choose whether to use the autoland or not. And in fact, you can see them on this screen. On the final column here, we have the basic decision, should we use the autoland or not? And then there are other factors which the pilots mentioned, perhaps at different stages, which were important, such as visibility, or wind speed, or whether the wind was a headwind or a tailwind, or whether the ship was stable or not. Now, some of these are rather obvious. A star means we don't care. So if you have no visibility, then in fact, you must use the autoland. You can't see where you're going. Here's an example where if the ship is unstable, it doesn't really matter. You can't use the autoland. As we go down here, of course, the rules or the examples get rather more complicated.
Now, these are not really rules, these are just examples
They're just
of what you've
examples.
extracted from the pilots.
And from these, like the traffic lights, we can find out what the rule may be. And we can do this simply by just telling the program to do this. This is quite a complicated job because you can see how difficult all these examples are, how you put them together in some sort of decision tree or whatever.
I presume you could get conflicting examples too.
Oh yes, it will handle that and it will come back and then ask people to give different examples to resolve that. Well, we can now actually look at the rule that we've got. Now, it may not be terribly easy to read, but basically it's saying, well, look at visibility first. If it's yes, then look at variation, a thing called variation. If that's small, then look at stability. If it's unstable, don't use the autoland. If it's stable, well, look at the wind speed. And here's some examples. And of course, one could go all the way down. It goes beyond the end of the screen, does the whole
I guess
rule.
the question is, has anybody used it yet to land it on the autopilot?
No, but we're actually testing it in the simulator for the space shuttle.
And this is the final rule that the machine has actually produced from just a set of examples given to you almost at random by those pilots.
The ones that you saw before.
Right, and they wouldn't actually know this rule, but they could look at it and find out whether it was correct.
Exactly, that's right.
I understand. Well, if AI is so important, why aren't more people making use of it?
Well, it's really a question of choosing the right problem. People think, of course, that AI is all about constructing little metal men who rush around and cause mischief. In fact, we're trying to mechanize thought. And a lot of very useful techniques have already been developed in AI under certain circumstances. In particular, if you're looking at a very specialized knowledge area, then the system works quite well.
But isn't AI a solution desperately rushing around looking for a problem?
No, I think if you take all the hype seriously, then I think you'll get it wrong. You're a fool to think that AI can solve all your problems. You're also a fool to ignore AI. There's some very useful techniques.
It seems to me that we've gone almost completely round in a circle. At one time, everybody thought the computer was an electronic brain, something with amazing inbuilt intelligence. And today, everybody's got their own micro, and they know it runs exactly what you tell it to do. So if a computer's only that, how can it have any sort of intelligence?
Well, it's certainly true that a computer will only do what you tell it. But what if you tell it how to think?
Ouch. Lesley,
And if you're interested in the subject of artificial intelligence, here are 2 books which you might like to read. There's an excellent layman's introduction by Donald Mickey and Rory Johnston, The Creative Computer, and at a slightly more advanced level, there's Professor Olty's own book. It's called Expert Systems, Concepts and Examples. Next week's programme includes a report by Fref from America of one company that claims to be using artificial intelligence in many of its products, including the voice-activated typewriter. Until then, good night.